Okay, we're all set. So thank you guys for your patience here while you're getting set up. If you didn't sign in the beginning, we have one at the end that you can sign in with. So this workshop is basically how to prepare for finals. It's going to go over some study strategies, but also a general studying timeline that can help you prep best for finals. We're also going to go over some resources that you all can use. My name's Madison. I am the graduate assistant for the academic consulting program here at the Student Academic Resource Center. And I'll quickly go over some resources. Um, okay, I'll quickly go over some resources that Stark has to offer. So just a little intro. Like I said, my name's Madison. Currently I'm in the clinical psychology program for my master's, going into my PhD in August. So definitely have a lot of experience with finals. Currently going through the thick of it with finals too. So hopefully I can share some stuff with you guys that has been successful for me. I also got my undergrad at UF, so had to do a lot of final prep in my days. Um, so I did want to talk a little bit about SARC services just real fast. So the Student Academic Resource Center, that's pretty much where you'll go for tutoring, supplemental instruction, which is like kind of like a form of tutoring, or academic consulting slash academic coaching and engagement. And then we also provide these academic success workshops. Honestly, at this point in the semester, it's probably most useful to look towards our study union, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but they're essentially just final exam review sessions. Typically, our review sessions and peer tutoring and SI are really targeted towards STEM classes and business as well. So like for me, psychology majors, there's nothing that is really offered there, but the academic coaching and consulting is a lot more helpful. If it's more like general academic skills that you're looking to build. Let me just see what's going on in the chat. Okay, the last code at the end will work for you guys. So you can use that for attendance, so no worries. So kind of just going into preparing for your final exam, the best thing to do is honestly starting to prepare early, which is why I really enjoy having these workshops like the week before finals week, because it honestly gives you a good week buffer to start preparing. So I usually do this for all tests, but specifically for finals, you want to save at least a solid week before you go into the actual exam. So like for me, I have a final on the 25th. So I'm gonna start like actually preparing and studying seriously starting this Friday. And that includes the weekends too, unfortunately. But that's mainly because I want to allocate enough time for myself to consistently study each day, because space studying is truly kind of the best method rather than just saving like 2 or 3 days beforehand to study. Doing it every single day, even if it's just like one chapter each day, helps you retain the information better. And what I like to do, the next slide is going to be a little overwhelming for the time management of how to block it, but I like to do like a time block. Obviously, you don't have to do something crazy like this where it's like every single thing that you do, but at the bare minimum, I personally like to time block when I'm going to study. So like in this example, this person put their study blocks from about 3 to 5:30 every day from Monday to Friday. And then also scheduled like some extra study time as well. So this is kind of like the idea that you'll want to use going into your finals, especially since you most likely have to prepare for more than just like one test. So I find that if beforehand, like even if you start doing this today, even if you're not studying today, you can prepare for the future by being like, okay, Friday, I'm going to start doing my first study period for this one course from 10 to 12 p.m. or 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then the next day, I'm going to study again for this course from like 1 to 3, something along that nature. And I find that this helps you, one, stick to the study schedule that you plan for yourself, and it also kind of just keeps you on track because like, especially if you put it as like a reminder into your calendar, it kind of helps you avoid being like, oh, I don't have any time, because you see, clearly you do have time. So that's like my first advice is, one, planning out what time you're going to study, when, and then having that consistently for each day. Okay. So the next is kind of determining how long you're going to need to study. So this is very much like dependent on the course and how much content you need. So a class that has like a cumulative exam over everything you learn throughout the semester, you're going to need a lot more time to study than a class where you're just taking like a final exam, but the exam is really only on a couple chapters. And it also depends on like the difficulty of the course. So for me, my Spanish tests that I did in undergrad were really easy. So I probably studied a total of like 20 to 30 minutes a day for the finals and did completely fine on them. However, if I took like physiological psychology, that would be a lot harder for me. So I'd have to study at least like 2 hours a day for a week leading up to the test to be able to get a good grade. So really take that time to like analyze how well you're doing the course, how easy you understand the material, and how much content is going to be on that exam to kind of determine how much time you need to start like time blocking. Um, a lot of people will, or not people, but there's just kind of this like common idea that you need like 2 to 3 hours for each credit hour that you're in. I think that's completely false. I think that's really what leads to burnout, and it's also just not feasible, especially when you have multiple finals. So really prioritize your time in the way of being like, what do I need to spend the most time on, and what can I maybe take back a little bit of time to focus in other areas on. Okay, so this is kind of something that seems very intuitive, but I feel as though a lot of people don't often do this ahead of time. And that's really creating an environment that's very conducive to studying and concentration. So, what I mean by that is choosing an area where you know you're going to be one distraction free and that you can spend a good amount of time in. Because let's say you're studying for like 3 tests, but each test you have to study 30 minutes to like 2 to 3 hours for. You're going to be in that area for a good amount of time, especially if you're doing it consistently and just like the entire time. So if like you're studying, like for me, I'll try to study in my dining room sometimes, but like that literally never works because my roommates will like go in and out of there. I'm gonna be distracted. My cat will come up. So for a billion reasons, that's not the most effective study environment. So alternatively, you could study in like, for some reason, Starbucks is always a really good place for me to study. I feel like I do a lot of good work there. The office at my GA is really good. I know I can like have that be very private, but it's kind of just figuring out what works best for you guys. And also I think one of the big things is preparing and organizing your area ahead of time. This is something I learned that would make me get up and like really affect how much time I'm actually studying. So like when I was doing a statistics class, I would be like, okay, wait, I need to get up and get my calculator. Now I need to go find this textbook. Now I need to do this. And that honestly kept kind of breaking up my study time. So like even though I said I was going to study for like an hour, that hour kind of turned into like 40 minutes because I would keep taking like unintentional breaks by having to get like random things. So my advice for that is pretty much before you start studying, um get like all the materials you need. So any textbook, any presentations, have them open up on your laptop. Like snacks, water, get that ahead of time, bring a jacket, kind of like any little thing that you think you might get distracted and make you get up out of your seat to go get, or like stop that flow of studying. Try to prevent that by doing that ahead of time. Also, I apologize if I sound bad. I'm kind of sick, so trying to push through that. Um, so yeah, that's kind of just the idea to keep the environment most conducive and allow you to continue studying. Okay, next, study. But the question is, how do we actually study here? So kind of like going around the room, what do you guys typically think of when you think of I'm gonna go study? Like what's your first thing that you would do? You can just yell it out. Quizlet? Okay.
Notes on flashcards.
Notes on flashcards. Okay, so kind of like the handwritten version of Quizlet. Okay. Is there anything else? Reviewing notes. Yeah, I think these are all kind of good ideas. Oh, we had someone in the chat. We'll talk about the Pomodoro rule in a second. Making my own study guide. Yeah, making your own study guide is a really good one as well. So these are all good things to study, to use to study, but I think the biggest one, is kind of integrating different study techniques. So while reviewing notes is awesome, if you just review your notes for the entire time you're going to study, that's a very passive form of studying. So it's kind of like passively taking in the information. Whereas if you pair reviewing notes with doing flashcards or making Quizlets and then testing yourself on Quizlets, that's pairing passive study with active study. And that's what's going to make you do the best because it's having you actively recall the information that you passively took in. So kind of the idea there is anytime you're studying, you want to make sure you're pairing a passive form of study with an active form of study. So this could be done in a variety of ways. So reading a textbook, taking notes, reading the notes, all of that, that's going to be kind of your passive study. That can be like kind of the first step you do where you're trying to learn the information. But then an active form of study would be doing practice problems, reviewing the homework and completing the homework again as if you were to do it for the first time, making flashcards, making Quizlets, and then testing yourself on that. Yes, I agree. So I wanted to kind of go into more of like what active studying is and how you can do this to make what you're studying actually stick in your brain and make it the most effective for you. You can come in. Are you here for the workshop? Yeah. Yeah, you can come in. So what active studying and active learning is actually engaging with the content rather than just like sitting there and reading it. Because I know I've been there where I'm like reading a page like 20 times and I never actually understand what it's saying. So in order to be able to actively learn, what you'll want to do is use techniques like summarizing, asking questions, and teaching others. So the first step to this that I like to do is breaking down complex concepts. So rather than like, I remember I would do this in high school a lot, like with the Krebs cycle. If I was just asked to like learn that on my own, I would be like, absolutely not. But what I did would break it down into like step-by-step things. And then I'd be like, okay, right now I just need to learn the first two steps. Then when I understood those first two steps, I would move on to the next two and things like that. So it's basically just trying to, and this can work for kind of like any course, figure out a way where you can break it down into more components. And then once you learn the first component, you can go on to the next one. And then also asking kind of like the why and how. So basically, once you learn like a definition of something, or you learn like a concept or process or anything like that, kind of see like the background behind it. So like, okay, I understand this concept, but why does it happen like that? And how does it connect to other concepts? So kind of just like, instead of just memorizing something verbatim, being able to interact it and apply it to other contexts. And then teaching what you learned. This one is the biggest one for me because what I'll do is I'll literally pretend that I'm trying to explain the concept as if I was a professor and see how well that I can do that. And if I'm noticing that one, like I can't do that at all, then I know I need to go back and relearn the content. But if I'm like, okay, I can explain this pretty well, I know that I'm ready to move on. So typically I'll do like the teach what you learned as like my last step. So when going into studying notes specifically, like I said, you'll want like at least a week to study. But what I specifically like for that is breaking it down into specific sections that you can study each day. And I think this goes into one, it makes it less overwhelming. And then also it goes into like, instead of like knowing I have 7, 8 chapters that I need to learn by the test, I can more visualize it as, okay, tomorrow I literally just need to learn chapter 1 and 2 and be able to do that well. Then the next day I can do 3 and 4. And honestly, this is the method that I use for pretty much every exam and test, and it works the best for me because then you still have kind of like that last day to review everything and make sure that you understand what you learned like at the beginning of the week of your study week. And I also like a lot of people don't like reaching out to professors or TAs and things like that, but I really think that if you even have like a question that you're like, oh, I don't know if this is like dumb or not, just email them. Like, as a TA, I would answer and questions that students like. I'm trying to give an example. Okay, so basically, sometimes the professor wouldn't say like specific content that would be on the exam, but if you ask them directly, they'll tell you. So a lot of the times they'll give you more information that the rest of the class might not know simply because they didn't ask. So I always recommend asking so you can be as prepared as possible. Jean Marie, we'll talk at the end. There's a way to get credit. Okay, so this is kind of a visualization of how I like to kind of like break down what I'm gonna do. So as you'll see, it kind of does the time blocking method where I have like a couple hours each day leading up to the test of what I'm gonna do. Then I have it split up for each section as well, like each chapter. And then I have a review day at the end where I pretty much just review everything. And that review day, honestly, like does not have to be like if you feel very confident in it, it could be literally like 30 minutes. But it's just kind of like that buffer day to help make sure you know everything. And then I like this version of it because it kind of shows you like what specific materials that you'll need to prepare. So does this format kind of like make sense to you guys? Okay, cool. Okay, now whoever said the Pomodoro technique in the chat, that is like one of the #1 techniques for breaks that has the most research and support behind it. So if you guys don't know, the Pomodoro technique is basically for every 30 minutes you study, you take a 5-minute break after that. Me personally, I found that I like to study for a little bit longer and then take like a 10-minute break. So I've adapted that for me, just because like I feel like 30 minutes is kind of not enough because I'll feel like I'm going in a good flow and then I'll have like a random break in the middle. So it's kind of like whatever works best for you. But at the end of the day, I really recommend taking some sort of break. I think like an hour is kind of pushing it. So like if you've been studying for an hour and you haven't taken a break yet, I highly recommend doing like at least a 10-minute break. I wouldn't do more than a 15-minute break, mainly because like that's when you kind of lose like that flow state you're in when you're studying and you're like, I really don't want to go back to studying. So I genuinely recommend doing like 10-minute break max after an hour or the Pomodoro technique, 30 minutes and then a 5-minute break. Okay, this is a video that we show typically on study skills and test prep. I genuinely like it. And I think it adds like a couple of things that I didn't talk about and then review some. It's only like 7 minutes, so we'll play that. To study skills and test. That's horrible. Let me fix that.
Not getting the results you would like.
Okay.
Perhaps you are not using the most efficient study strategies to prepare for exams. In this video, we will cover 5 types of study strategies for effective test preparation and better mastery of course content. You will want to start this process as soon as possible, as studying is a large investment, and you do not want to cram. First, let's look at your study environment. Do you currently study on your bed, on the floor, at the kitchen table? How about the library? If you are on your bed, your brain does not know if you're there to study or to sleep. This makes it easier to get distracted or doze off. If you are at the kitchen table, instead of focusing on studying, you may be tempted to get something to eat. Options would be to study in the library or at a desk, since you will know exactly what you are there to do and will be able to dive right into your work. It is always important to study in a place that is conducive to studying. Now, let's talk about the 5 types of studying. Studying to gather information, studying to learn information, studying to check for learning, studying to refresh, and studying to improve learning skills. When studying to gather information, you must organize everything needed in order to learn. Compile any study guides professors have given you, as well as your textbook, lecture, and chapter notes. First, make sure that you are reading your textbook thoroughly. One way to do this is by using the SQ3R method, which stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. To survey your textbook, make note of the print, italics, charts, graphics, chapter summaries, and end of chapter questions. This shouldn't take more than a few minutes as you are only identifying each chapter's core ideas. Next, develop questions from the main.
So I kind of wanted to pause it there because, like I was saying earlier with active study rather than passive study. So when you're doing kind of like the SQ3R method, and you don't have to do specifically that, but the idea is just kind of interacting with like your textbook if you're reading it. So rather than just like reading it once and calling it done, you're pretty much not going to remember that information. So if you do want to use the textbook as like your primary form of studying, then you'll really want to make sure you're like making questions, answering the questions based off that, and being able to kind of paraphrase in your own words what it said.
Ideas you discovered during your survey. Now you can read and actively seek the information that will answer your questions instead of plodding through each line of text. Reading this way helps to prevent the blank mind syndrome, which is the inability to remember what you just read. Next, recite the answers you have found aloud from memory.
What are the two laws of inheritance? Two laws of inheritance, law of segregation and law of independent assortment.
When you finish a chapter, try to answer your questions without looking at your notes or the text. You can then use the answers in your notes or text to check and see how much you have learned.
Organism with a pair of identical alleles.
Lastly, you should review these notes every 2 to 3 days. Now that you have adequate textbook notes, make sure to attend class and take notes on the lecture to fill in the gaps. To ensure the accuracy of your notes, you can compare them with those of a trusted classmate. You can also confirm your notes with your professor. Some suggested forms of note-taking include the Cornell format, note cards, and outlines. These formats facilitate reviewing and learning. When studying to learn the information you have gathered, frequent repetition becomes an important part of retention, but you must also learn to understand the meaning of the information, not just memorize. Individual studying and study groups are both equally beneficial, and getting creative with tough concepts is also encouraged. Time management is essential throughout this process. Make sure to define your priorities and create a timeline for yourself. You can refer to our time management video for more information. It is very important that you study to check for learning. The best strategy to create deep and durable learning is self-testing. Retrieving information on a regular basis helps you build strong connections in the brain and solidify concepts in your long-term memory. The harder and longer it takes you to recall, the stronger your retention will be. Quiz yourself without the help of notes or books. Take out a blank sheet of paper or use a whiteboard to write down everything you know about the subject which you are studying. You and a fellow student can also create practice tests and question each other in the format you expect on the exam. Repeat this process 2 to 3 times weekly if necessary to make sure you thoroughly master the subject. You can now study to refresh your knowledge so you do not forget the material you have learned. Rehearse the concepts you haven't reviewed in a while to make sure they stay in your long-term memory. To ensure maximum retention, you should do this without the aid of your notes. The first 4 types of studying are designed to prepare you for what is important prior to taking your exam. Studying to improve learning, on the other hand, is what occurs after you have taken your test or quiz. Use your test results as feedback to help
So I think that part is really helpful, especially since you guys are at your finals and you've most likely taken a couple quizzes and tests, hopefully, in the course. So I really do recommend looking back at those tests slash quizzes and seeing kind of like where you went wrong with them, or if you got a really good grade, what did you do differently for that specific test, and then try to replicate that or try to alter it based on kind of the grade you got.
Help you modify or replace study skills in preparation for your next test or quiz. If you did not do as well as you had hoped, be sure to analyze your current study strategies and behaviors. Be honest with yourself and think about what type of study you could have spent more time on. Talk to other students who did well on their exam and see what they did differently. This may help you discover different strategies that will work better for you in the future. You may also want to consider utilizing campus resources, such as
All right, then it just talks about SARC. Um, so yeah, does anyone have any questions based on that video or anything at all? Okay. I think the kind of like 5 types of studying really does help to kind of conceptualize how you are like the process of studying from learning, taking in from the information from class and the presentations, lectures and everything to the point where you're self-testing yourself and then teaching others, even if it's an imaginary other that you're teaching. Even if your exam is open book and open notes, should we still do this? I think that's actually a really good question if your exam's open book and open notes. So, a lot of the times, if you do have an open book exam, I think a lot of people think it's like, okay, I don't need to study. I think it's kind of mixed with how long you have to take the exam. If you have like an unlimited timeline to take that exam and it's open no open book, personally, I would place that on a lower priority of my studying because I can like obviously refer to my materials and I'm not on a time crunch. But I would have open note, open book exams that were like 10 questions in 10 minutes. And for that, it really wasn't open note, open book because like really don't have the time to reference it. So it really depends how much time you have and kind of like how well you have a foundational understanding of the knowledge. I'm glad that video was helpful. So this is the other thing I wanted to talk about. This is study union. So study union is an event that SARC holds every year. Kind of just by a show of hands or in the comments. Are any of you guys like business or STEM majors at all? Okay, awesome. We got a lot. So this is going to be very helpful for you. Because we typically have our courses geared to the courses that have high drop fail withdrawal rates, and those typically are STEM courses and business courses. So starting next week on the 20th, actually I think that's a Sunday. Is it Sunday? I don't know. It is. Okay. So then starting this Sunday, we have reviews and they're pretty much all day. Let me pull this up for Zoom too. Sorry guys. I'm using like 2 monitors here. Um, but essentially, oh, there was one the other day for intro to C programming. Cool. Essentially what it is pretty much like 2-hour review sessions, and they're also recorded. So if you can't go in person, you can still access them through this website. They're always uploaded here. And it's pretty much our peer tutors and our SI leaders going over kind of a final exam review. A lot of the time, they will use final exams that professors have done in the past and use those as example problems and things along that nature. So I truly recommend looking into this if any of your classes are here. It's in person, but it's also online. So if you want to join through Zoom, that works too. There's also like some classes, like if you're doing elementary Spanish, so that's cool too. But definitely reference this. I literally just looked up UCF Study Union, and that'll be there. It's in the student union. It's on the second floors, but we'll have like a table in the middle right when you like walk in if you have any questions about where to go. No, I know. I wish we did have more classes offered as well. Yeah, so that's study union, and I think that's always very helpful. So I recommend checking that out. So getting back to this. So this kind of goes over a little, oh yeah, sorry.
Studying classes, are they like specific to like the ways certain teachers teach them, or is it just like in general? Cause like there's specific STEM classes I'm taking on transcripts.
It's honestly more generalized, rather than like a specific course, especially for peer tutoring, because like our peer tutors don't like really specify it to a like instructor. So they kind of try to make it more general rather than just like specific. And they also have a lot of times like where you can ask questions too, so it's not just like they're doing it and there's no input from the students. So yeah, I wanted to go over test anxiety a little bit for the last part of this, because it's a like kind of very normal side effect about just caring about your class and wanting to do well. I found that like kind of the best antidote to that is being prepared because you can kind of rely on that preparation as kind of being like a fallback of being like, okay, I am anxious. However, I know I spent like a week studying. I put in the work as long as you did put in the work, like an hour, 2 hours every day. However, obviously there are times where you can still like show up to the test and be anxious. So the thing that I found best is kind of when the day of the test, I always like to do a light review to kind of like warm up to the content that's going to be on the test before I go in. So this doesn't mean like spending an hour doing like practice problems. I would literally do like maybe one practice problem or review like some vocab definitions, just like little things like that. So when you go and take the test, it's not the first time you're seeing that content for the day. I also like arriving early to the testing environment because if I'm like cutting it close or I'm late, that's gonna make me feel even worse and feel like I'm already behind on the test and having to catch up. So if your test isn't online and it's in person, be sure to get there at least like 10 minutes early. And then also, I rely on deep breaths. If I feel like I'm like kind of panicking and I'm like, oh, I just spent like 20 minutes on this problem and I'm not even done with it, I'm like, okay, I know I have like 20 seconds at least where I can kind of take a deep breath and calm down. So I really honestly probably do that at least once it's test while I'm taking it, just because that makes me think more clearly going into further of the test. And then also use your resources. Obviously, it's a little bit late to get student accessibility services, but moving forward, for your next classes and things like that, looking into our counseling center and SAS is always helpful. I'm gonna skip this activity for now. Just we got a little bit of a late start. Oops. But this, I do recommend you guys do following this workshop. It's pretty much looking at when the dates of your tests are going to be and then figuring out your study schedule for that. So like I said, you want to make sure you're doing it at least a week in advance, which we should all pretty much be able to do considering it's Wednesday. Finals might start like Monday of next week, but do the best you can with that. And then figure out like how you can implement that into a space study schedule. So this was the example I showed earlier. At least giving yourself 30 minutes a day to study for each test that you're going to have. So this is kind of like the night before and the day after the test. A lot of people might stay up really late cramming for the test. But to be honest, that's really not the best thing to do because sleep actually helps you retain the information that you learned. So it's better to go to sleep and be able to solidify that information in your brain than kind of just stay up to like 4 a.m. trying to cram in new information. Also, the reverse of that, I really don't recommend trying to go to bed at like 8:30 if you usually go to bed at like 11 p.m. primarily because you have an actual sleep cycle. And if you disrupt that, one, it's going to be really hard for you to fall asleep in the first place. So that can kind of add to the anxiety of like, oh, I haven't even fallen asleep yet, but I've been laying here in bed for 2 hours. So all that to say, just try to stick as much as you can to your normal sleep schedule. So this is during the test. I know this of some of the stuff is like what we were taught in high school, like going into the SAT, but I think sometimes we forget some of the basic elements of test taking. One thing to do is really read the instructions carefully and like actually engage with it, underline, highlight using your mouse, whatever you can do. And what I like to do is do the questions that I know first and that are kind of easy to me. And if I don't know it, or I know that it's going to take me a really long time, I'll typically just skip it and come back. But pair that in mind with do the questions that are worth the most points. So if I know one question is worth like 30 points and another question's only worth 5, I'll typically want to look at the 30-point question and be like, okay, do I know this pretty well? Can I get this done in a reasonable amount of time? Or do I literally not know it at all and it's going to take me forever? If it's going to take me forever, I'll get the 5-point questions out of the way and then come back to the 30-point questions. Multiple choice. I think the best thing for this is to think of the choice, like don't even look at the answers, just read the question and what answer comes into your head first, and then select the answer that matches that the best from the choices given. I think this helps kind of prevent it kind of prevents you from being like tricked on the questions, because if you're like, okay, I know that the answer is like somewhat in my head, and then kind of just compare to what's given. And the last piece of that is kind of trusting yourself, unless there's a key piece of information that like was revealed in another part of the test. I wouldn't go back and change the answer, mainly because a lot of that comes from second guessing, and studies have shown that typically you change it to the wrong answer. So try to stick with the answer that you chose first. And then after the test. So you can give yourself the rest of the day to kind of ruminate over the test, ask like, oh, hey, what'd you get on this one? Or just feel bad about yourself if you feel like you flunked it. But then the next day, really try to focus on your next activity, or even if you're done with tests, like focus on your plans for the summer, extracurricular activities you're involved in, something to take your mind off it, because ruminating about a test that's already done and gone, it's not going to help you prepare for your other finals, and it's really not going to be productive in any way. So I highly emphasize this to mainly prioritize good mental health. So just the key takeaways of everything I talked about today. Study 1 week before the test. If your guys' test is like Monday, let's start studying today. Prioritize space studying. So every single day, study for at least 30 minutes leading up to the test, and specifically put this down. If it's in the notes phone on your app, that's fine. A piece of paper, just write down when you're going to study, what hours and what times. And then create an environment conducive to studying. So making sure distraction free as much as possible, preparing your area ahead of time, and breaking down that material into sections that you can study every day. Taking the regular study breaks like I was talking about, whether it's the Pomodoro technique or just doing a 10-minute break after an hour of studying, and then focusing on ways that you can reduce that test taking anxiety by doing strong test preparation or deep breaths when taking the test. And then stick to your regular sleep schedule like I was talking about, and prevent the rumination over the test. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys. Unless you have any questions, you can scan this QR code. This is what's gonna give you credit for coming to the workshop if you need it, or if you were just here for fun, you can scan it, let us know how we did, or I did, and what you guys think could be improved and things like that. And Jean Marie, this is where you can scan to get the credit for it. Yeah. But other than that, that's all I have for you guys. Thank you for coming. Yes, Morgan, you can send me the forms to sign. Let me put my email. Oh, my email's on the screen. Yeah, you can use the email Madison _Verdone@ucf.edu. And I'll send it to you via email. This one was the final countdown. Oh, I didn't mean to stop. I mean to stop recording. Sorry, guys. I'll reshare my screen if you still need that.